Okay, so here we go. This is week 9 for our human movement. So this is week 9. We're kind of shifting into the last part of the class, last part of the course. There's 5 lectures that are going to be on the final exam. It is not cumulative, so the final exam will just be on these 5 lectures. And this is probably the most important of the 5 lectures, probably the most involved of the 5 lectures, and this will really start to set you up for the wheelchair assignment in this week's lab. So it's really important to take some time and really break this down and really listen to this lecture because it's really important for a lot of things coming up in this class. And even more importantly, probably some of the most important material you're going to get from this class in terms of your future career as an OT around wheelchairs. You'll be dealing with wheelchairs. Most of you, for the rest of your careers, even if you're in pediatrics, you're going to be dealing with wheelchairs. You're supposed to be the expert, one of the experts on wheelchairs, how well they work for somebody in terms of their function and their fit. So this is just the kind of the beginning of your journey around wheelchairs, and you have to be kind of experts on wheelchairs. Okay, this first one we're just going to tackle Arnold. He's a really good example of a spinal cord injury. A lot of the folks, younger folks who are seeing wheelchairs have had spinal cord injuries. So he's a good example to kind of bring that to life, what it's like, what you see in the clinic, and in different situations around OT and your clients that are using wheelchairs. Here's our lecture questions. There's a lot to them because there's just a lot of material to get through. Very important that you know the answers to all these questions. Please come to me if you're not getting the answers to these questions because they're going to come back on the final exam. And really, this is, again, stuff you're going to need for your whole OT career. Okay, so Arnold, the story around Arnold, he's the Native American who had the diving accident. Based on a real client I had, dove into a pool with no water, didn't realize there was no water in it. And he broke his neck, basically, and had a severe spinal cord injury from his neck on down. The story is useful in terms of a lot of the OT stuff you're going to see around spinal cord injuries. Adaptive devices involved. The biggest one for him, of course, is his wheelchair. He had a power wheelchair. At first, he had no use of his arms at all. So people were using the power wheelchair to maneuver it for him, and then eventually he was able to use it for himself, built him a splint to help him use, had like a little ball kind of thing. We'll talk more about that when we get into the controls. So he's able to control his wheelchair. Another device that he had, can't remember whether it's in the story or not, but it's something called a Winsford feeder. Don't need to memorize this for the final, but just FYI. It's a device that will help you feed yourself if you have no use of your arms. There's tons of different kinds of adaptive technology. Does lots of great things for our clients. We need to know about it as OTs. Again, that's something we need to be experts on, is assistive technology. And I was able to get that for him and get his insurance to pay for it. So he was able to go out to eat and he could feed himself, even though he had no use of his arms at that point. Before I get into the type of injury he had, a lot of issues, ethical dilemmas with Arnold. If you read the story around his wife, his abusive behavior towards therapists, towards his wife, a lot of dysfunction in that home, to say the least. Hard as a therapist, you kind of want to say, stay objective, working for your client as much as you can, but he was extreme to the extreme. A lot of ethical issues around reporting the abuse, even though it was just verbal abuse, at least in the beginning, around his wife. As an OT, when you go into the home and deal with clients, you have a response as a first reporter. You're legally responsible for reporting abuse of any kind that you see. He also had a goal in that story, which is important to note and to need to know. This is something that may come back on the final exam. He wanted to be able to go hunting again. He was very much into hunting. And he wanted to use a sip and puff hunting rifle, an adaptive kind of device like this sort of thing to get out into the woods and hunt. To me, I decided that was where I was going to draw the line. I didn't want to work with him on that goal because I didn't think it was safe. because he was so abusive, because he was a big drinker. Um, he was an alcoholic, and it doesn't get into it too in depth in the story, but he definitely had drinking issues, anger issues. I wasn't going to be responsible as an OT to helping him use a gun. I just didn't think that was a good mix. So you have to kind of really think on your feet and kind of think, oh, this is just too much. Sometimes it's gray. It's a black and white kind of decision. What kind of injury did he have? He had what they call a C4 incomplete. What do I mean by C4? Look at this graphic here. These are the cervical bones of your spinal cord that surround your spinal cord. The spinal cord is the bundle of nerves that goes right down the middle of that. You actually will see one of these. I think in the spring you'll go back to the cadaver lab a little bit. And they kind of distinguish where was the injury along this cord in the bone. So his was C4s, which is right here. So you can see how these injuries are categorized. Quadriplegia, that means all four limbs, both arms, both legs, are partially or fully paralyzed. The red is where somebody with a C4 is usually paralyzed, especially if it's a complete injury. I'll talk about the difference in a second. So if he had a complete injury, his was incomplete, but if it was complete at C4, he'd be like these two figures. He'd have nothing really from the neck down that he could feel or use. And then you get into this blue area, the thoracic bones, this area of the spinal cord injury. You're generally speaking a paraplegic. You have no use of your legs. Your trunk is good, but you have no use of your legs. Interestingly enough, when I was seeing Arnold, I had another client, a younger guy. He was going to college to be a civil engineer, I think. And he was in a car accident. Alcohol is involved, car accident. He was a C4, not a C4, he was a T6, I think it was. So he was a paraplegic. So he had full use of his trunk, but nothing in his legs. Whereas Arnold, when I first saw him, he just had from the neck up. That's all pretty much he had. And then you get down into the lower area, also paraplegia, the lumbar region, or even in the coccyx. So his injury was right here. He broke his neck when he dove into the pool. And it was incomplete. What do I mean by incomplete? It wasn't total. It wasn't all the way across. So envision the spinal cord coming down, the C4 level. He didn't lose all of his nerve use all the way down. Some of the nerves survived. Not a lot, but some of the nerves survived coming all the way down. He could feel everything in his lower body. And eventually, as you see in the story, he started to get use of his arms, which really tells you it was incomplete. If it was complete, he would never get use to anything below the neck. Think of it maybe as a knife. A complete would be a knife cutting the spinal cord totally, severing it in two pieces right here. That would be a complete spinal cord injury. It was severed completely. It's totally dead below there. His was incomplete. It wasn't totally cut, maybe 3/4 of the way cut. Metaphorically speaking, it wasn't literally cut. It was just damaged. So his was incomplete. There was nerve use to a limited degree coming down through the rest of his body. So that's kind of the difference between complete and incomplete. Let me know if it's still not clear to you, because you will see that term again and again through your OT careers. This is another graphic. It may help you kind of understand how this works. This, generally speaking, shows you how much function they have depending on where the injury is. C4 and above, if it's a complete. This is all about complete. So if Arnold was a complete injury, totally damaged, everything below here was dead. Everything below here was dead. Below the C4 was dead with his spinal cord. That was the key. If that was the case, the focus in therapy, the focus in this person's life would be just to keep breathing, to keep his diaphragm going, for him to be able to breathe. Christopher Reeve, you maybe remember him, some of you may not. He was a big movie star, played Superman in the movies. He was a terrible accident on a horseback. He fell off a horse and broke his neck, and he was like a C4 complete. He was on a ventilator, a machine to breathe for him, or assisted his breathing for most of the day. C5, C6, right in here kind of area. They've gotten some use of their arms. Deltoids, we know the deltoids lift the arms up, the wrist extensors, and you work your way down triceps, they could extend his arm. You can see what they can and cannot do, function-wise, depending on where the injury is. Get down lower around T1, their hands. This is where my second client was. He had some chest muscle use. He had very little with his abdominals. Nothing with his legs. No control over his bowel and his bladder. He had a catheter, and he was on a bowel program. This man here, looks like he's probably incomplete down around the lumbar area, L1, L5. He's got some use of his legs, but they're obviously partially paralyzed, so they're trying to rehab it, get him stronger so he can walk again, hopefully without a walker kind of thing. So that's an idea of the levels and how that works.